Welcome. Welcome to the Ministry Forum podcast, coming to you from the Center for Lifelong Learning at Knox College, where we connect, encourage, and resource ministry leaders all across Canada as they seek to thrive in their passion to share the gospel. I am your host, the Reverend John Borthwick, director of the center and curator of all that is ministryforum.ca. I absolutely love that I get to do what I get to do, and most of all, that I get to share it all with all of you. So thanks for taking the time out of your day to give us a listen, whether you're a seasoned ministry leader or just beginning your journey. This podcast is made with you in mind. This week on the Ministry Forum podcast, we are in conversation with our good friend, Dr. James Tyler Robertson, author of the book Overlooked, The Forgotten Origin Stories of Canadian Christianity. And we're excited that James is in the virtual studio with us. We hope that this will not go too far off the rails too quickly, but I don't know, no promises. Two Gen Xers in the house, history nerds. It's going to be something today. Mm-hmm. Buckle up, Ministry Forum community. You've never heard history come alive the way James makes it come alive. No pressure to perform, James, but let's dive into the bio. Dr. James Tyler Robertson is the Associate Professor of Christian History and the Director of Distributed Learning at Tyndale University. He teaches the history of Christianity as well as courses on Canadian Christianity and evangelism. His areas of research are on church and war, Canadian religious history, and historical theology. At least that's what the back of his book says. And I guess that's where it was inaccurate because now he's an associate professor. I know him as a bivocational pastor of two rural Baptist churches, Mountsburg and Westover. And just an all-around great guy to talk about 80 shows and the War of 1812. I mean, you just can't find that these days in people. Like, where are you going to find those conversation partners?
Why would you be looking to look for it?
I know, right? James, mostly on that War of 1812 stuff. It's so good to have you in the studio, my friend. Delighted to be in conversation with you today.
Thank you, brother. I'm very, very pleased to be here.
How would you like to introduce yourself? Are there more tidbits of James? What's the origin story of James?
I'm probably bring my parents in here for that, but we'll forego that. I always like to think of how I got into history, and I will give credit to an animated mouse. Now, hopefully not the one you're thinking of, not the face of a massive entertainment corporation, but a much smaller, pun intended, character by the name of Max, the 3,000-year-old mouse. I feel like I disappointed you there. I feel like you thought I was going somewhere else, but that's good. That's hopefully we can keep these surprises.
I was going for Mighty Mouse, but apparently not.
Here I come to save the day. Yeah, Mighty Mouse is great too, but
excellent.
Specifically to history is Max the 3,000-year-old mouse, which is like little 3 to 5 minute cartoons. They were on in between other longer cartoons like Transformers or Gummy Bears. That's a weird one, but it's in the pantheon. And what Max, as the title would indicate, was 3,000 years old. And he would spend 3 to 5 minutes having explored the world and to sort of share a story of like when I was with Julius Caesar or when I was at the building of the Great Wall of China or things like that. And he would just explain. And that was usually when most of my friends would go up and get like snacks because back in the day there was commercials and you only had a set amount of time before the next show started. But I would stay glued. I thought Max, the 3,000-year-old mouse, was just great. This was no filler for me. It was all killer. And so I think I look back at little young Dr. James Tyler Robertson, as I was known back then. I was very much enamored with the stories. And then that developed into growing up in the West. There's lots of time out in creation, lots of time out in rivers and mountains and stuff. And I gravitated towards dragons and stories of knights and mythology. First the Greeks, of course, growing up in the West, and then getting into my own family, sort of Celtic, so the Irish myths, the Scottish myths and stuff. And just that always captured my imagination and got into all that sort of stuff. And as I look back now as a middle-aged, graying, balding Gen Xer, I can sort of see the origin stories there. There was something a little bit grunge about history. It was telling like really, really janky stories, and there was always like good. They were always interesting, and I've never actually. I mean, if somebody makes history, that's an interesting human being. These are interesting women and men that have changed the course of the world, changed how subsequent generations have understood, good, bad, otherwise, whatever, things keep surfacing up. So I'm always kind of saddened and surprised. I'm like, how do you make history boring? It's like, how do you make big movies, these epic stories, boring? And I guess it's in the telling, but yeah. So I will credit it to the creators of Max, the 3,000-year-old mouse. Thanks for inspiring at least one future historian.
I love that. Wow, Max, the 3,000-year-old mouse. I'll have to look him up.
Oh, yeah.
I'm having a vague memory of him.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so funny. I've actually never looked him up as an add-on. That does seem like a glaring oversight. So that might be something I do right after.
That's your afternoon. There you go.
My afternoon.
That's awesome. Well, as a fellow history person, I graduated from McMaster University with a BA in history, having gone there to do medieval history. So similar to yourself, there were certain parts of history that I was very interested in. And sadly, again, listeners, if you're curious about the academic world, if a professor ever leaves a university, sometimes the courses that they taught won't be offered either in the future or ever again. And apparently the medieval historian at Mac was no longer there after a while. And so I got stuck with a very general BA. I just sort of just
someone's name,
like, the smorgasbord of things. Yeah, it was fun. Anyways, love history. It's a good time. So on the Ministry Forum podcast, we always encourage people to read the books that the authors we interview share with us. So our conversation is shaped a little bit more around the tidbits that excite me. And so let's start with this one. You write that in the 1870s Canada, the churches faced a similar reality around religious culture as we do today, and yet they were able to turn the tide. Can you share a little more about that and maybe some insights of how they did that very thing, turning the tide in the 1870s?
Yeah. Not a time we tend to think of where church attendance was going down. And I think I want to start with saying that, like, a lot of the metrics for this sort of stuff is around church attendance, and we'll return to this, I'm sure, in these conversations. I'll say not convinced. That's not strong enough. I'm not convinced that is a very good metric, and especially in the commercialized world that we live in, especially post Second World War. And that has sort of become something else entirely, and it's almost unchallenged now. And I think that's a problem. But we don't tend to look at the 1800s as a time when people just didn't go to church. We kind of have these assumptions that this is very much an issue of, again, maybe probably the post Second World War period up to the present day. But yeah, there's really interesting. The numbers were really low in the 1840s. And this is before, like, you think of some of those sort of 19th century challenges to Christianity, and I'll just put up Darwin. We have Origin of the Species, then the Descent of Man. This is before higher criticism coming out of Europe in the later 19th century. So this is really early. And again, a lot of this just had to do with distance. People were not willing to go. They just didn't have a church nearby. And I know many of us with cars and all sorts of stuff, sometimes we're like, traffic looks a little weird. It could rain today. Maybe I'll sleep in. So, but imagine if you had to, like, get up well before the crack of dawn and make it through the woods, and it'd be cold and raining and stuff like that just to attend a church that might be 30, 40, 50, 60 kilometers away. Not that anybody's going to be able to walk 60 kilometers, but that's what I mean. Like, the rubric's not great. However, some changes do happen from about 1840 to 1870, and like I say in the book, there's a joke among Canadian religious historians that in 1841 there were 3 pubs on the corner of every town. By 1871 there were 3 churches, and it's not a great joke, it's not super funny, but it does kind of communicate how things were changing. So there's a few things that need to be taken seriously, because the numbers really were low, down to numbers that would be pretty close to nowadays, like maybe a little bit higher, but in the low 20% of citizens that were in the census data. And the census data by that point was pretty good. It's pretty consistent. It may not be completely up to our present day standards, but it's not just sort of made up. So we're in about the 24%. So that's not that far off of current days. I mean, we might be kicking around 16, 17 now, but for quite a while there, were about the low 20% of people who regularly attended Christian services and whatnot. And again, there's all sorts of questions about how often, it describes that. But a few really interesting things happen. So I don't want to this is when historians become boring, so I won't get into the nitty gritty of it. But basically, up until about the middle of the 19th century, we had establishment, which just means because we were a British colony, the Church of England had preeminence. The Church of Scotland was second because they were the established Church of Scotland. So what we would, loosely refer to as Presbyterians, not in any way, shape, or form were they a unified bunch. I think Presbyterians were more factious than maybe everything, and that goes to our current, our Scottish stubbornness as it goes. But by about the 1850s, that changed, and the colonial authorities, the ones who were still governing Canada. So, of course, Canada gets home rule on July 1st, 1867. So we're in the days before that. But they recognized that, one version of the Protestant church, because the Catholics in Quebec had kind of an almost establishment status as well. They had been loyal to the British Protestant crown, which is a whole interesting thing. But again, the Brits were not going to necessarily make the French Catholics their church. They weren't going to push their church down because they knew that would cause no end of problems. And they were the large populist movement. So even the French Catholics had a certain amount of establishment. But they recognized, especially with people like the Methodists, the Baptists, Lutherans, there was other legitimate, and this was a struggle, so I'm really sort of pulling this down. It was a struggle to recognize that just because they weren't Church of England or Church of Scotland or Presbyterian or the right versions of Presbyterian didn't mean they weren't loyal to Britain. And so the end of that sort of establishment and the allowing for really on a political level to allow other versions of the faith to have an equal share of the monies. It wasn't super equal, but the Church of England had things called clergy reserves. So a full seventh, and think about this with the size of Canada, a full seventh of the land was dedicated to the Church of England, and they could build churches there, they could build ministries there, they could rent, so they could draw a whole bunch of money, and it was deemed that was basically unfair to other expressions of Christianity, most notably the Methodists, because they were very popular in the rural areas, and the critique against them is that they were just too American, like way too emotional, very, very American. Methodism was really popular in America, so it was kind of considered, this could be a problem. Like they could, and thankfully this never happens anymore, they could couch Christian language in clearly American political language, and that could change the colony of British North America to become the 51st state. There was not 50 states at that time. So, I mean, like, these things just keep on happening and cycling again, and we can get to that if you want, but whatever. We'll keep it in history for now. So when that sort of ended, a lot of money is freed up. And a lot of churches started to be able to build. So the Methodists is a perfect example. They were revivalists. They had a couple small structures, but they were traveling. They were really among the people. And now as they got money, they start to build their own sort of brick and mortar establishments in these locales. So then people started to go to that because now you don't have a Church of England church, which you're not super into. There's respect for it. And you need to do them for like marriages if you want to do that, or burials, or if you are interested in your child being baptized. Again, a lot of people they're not theologians, they're farmers. They're like, how does Christianity impacting their day-to-day life? Just like present day. But now if you have a Methodist church, 2 kilometers away, well, okay, obviously, like we're farmers. We want to make sure that we are honoring God because our crops are dependent on it. That's a little mercenary, but you get what I'm saying. So that really loosening up the purse strings really sort of helped that. Plus, I mean, America was growing, and they've been since they declared independence, and actually, we'll say 1783 after the Revolutionary War ended, America's been the perpetual rival to Canadian, doing air quotes on a podcast, quote unquote, Canadian interests. Like, we're always sort of looking at the rivalry, and I think any Canadian will know that the rivalry is very one-sided. America does not really look at us at all, and definitely not as any kind of economic rival. We're like a little brother they've taken under their wing. But for the Canadians was this sort of idea of the Americans have cities like Boston and New York. They're very developed, and we've got small little towns. Like, we've got Quebec City, we've got Montreal, Newark, which is present-day Niagara-on-the-Lake, all right, a little bit York, present-day Toronto, Cornwall, Kingston. Like, these are fortified, but they're still pretty small. But the idea of churches coming in there actually becomes a pretty good sign of civilization. Like, we are coming into our own. We don't need to be just a British colony. We can build our own stuff. So again, with the money, more churches equals more civilization, more respect. And that was really big too. Again, not really necessarily specific to the churches, because there's more banks, more theaters, more government buildings. So all these things sort of show that we're not just some sort of backwoods hick land. We're actually civilized. We are actually a people of civilization. And again, I use civilized in air quotes a little bit there too, because we can unpack what civilization means from various perspectives. But most importantly, and again, this remains absolutely true today, immigration. The more people that came in, and Christianity nowadays is stable and in certain sections growing solely because of immigration. So when you look at like Chinese Christian churches are huge, a lot of Korean Christian churches are huge, Afro-Caribbean churches. Yep. So we're looking at not the generations that have been here for 10 generation settlers and stuff like that. We're looking at immigrants who are coming, and the church is still a vital part of their social network. So all these sorts of things to say, and again, I try to do this quickly and famously historical. As a historian, I don't do that, but I think the big lesson sort of take away is like, this is not based on the church evangelizing successfully, proselytizing successfully, coming up with the right combination of programs. It was more societal desires that the church played a role in. So the church didn't necessarily create this sort of reversal. And again, we got to critique like how they define the reversal. They didn't create it, but they benefited from some bigger social issues that were taking place. Chief among them, immigration, and then secondly, economic boom. Because when they sold off the clergy reserves, they gave money to the Church of England, the Presbyterians, the Catholic Church, and the Methodists. And this actually inspired the Methodists to sort of unify so they could get a big chunk of that money so that they could build. And then it sort of expanded on to like, okay, let's head west because the Americans are going west. And so we need some money and sending some people out here. So that really is kind of the story behind how that reversal happened. Not necessarily the church all of a sudden figuring out the new way to do things, as much as the society itself started to have a desire for a few of these sort of structures, and the church played very well into it. And we'll see that again in subsequent generations.
Yeah, James, it's fascinating. I hadn't made that connection until you said it. I'd also just to not that how would I phrase this? Not that I'm seeing other people, James, but I also was reading Dr. Stuart McDonald's recent book of Tradition and Tension, and in there,
you know what? If we want to keep that analogy going, I'm really happy. We've had a good time. Stu is a wonderful guy. He is a friend of mine, an excellent scholar. So good choice. I'm proud of you. You're moving up in the world.
I appreciate it. Home team. Staying with the Presbyterians, but. In hanging out with his newest book, that theme around, essentially as society goes, the church is sort of in tow with it, really, and yet there's always been a mindset in the church that somehow we can do this, we can do it differently, like we can overcome this, and so my question came from really a sense of people might think, oh, look, there was a great boom of Christianity based on numbers, and we can talk about the problematicness of numbers for sure, but the immediate thing we'd be drawn to is, oh, well, we must have been doing evangelism really well, or exactly. our programs were stellar, or the appeal of the gospel was just so much that people were coming, and it's like, no, it's called immigration, economic boom, clergy reserves, these kind of things in that day. And then same kind of stuff in the last century, similar kinds of things. Like as immigration grows, churches are going to boom.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we can sort of look at that as sort of like negatively and like, oh, so the church didn't do anything. It's like, no, I think you hit it perfectly there. There's a sort of unexamined rhetoric or sentiment in our eyes that exactly that, like we've done things right, so now people come. Other than saying might doesn't make right or big doesn't make better, I think that's all we need to sort of say about the numbers game. It's like, just because it's bigger doesn't mean it's better. And that's fair. So we'll kind of take that off the table for a second too. But again, keep in mind the church was in service to people and they were helping people. And so looking at it as all of a sudden people started showing up, so now we've won. It was like, well, no, they were doing it all along. And when the societal desire shifted, we're still so steeped in this rhetoric of church versus the world, and we have to see ourselves as the leaders and bring these things on. When of course Jesus, he so clearly says, I didn't come, I came to serve, not to be served. And so these churches, these Methodists had been riding. They did unbelievable stuff, and Baptists as well, and Church of England people. Like I don't want to. There's not like one denomination was the bad guy, even though that's how they tended to phrase each other. But people like Robert Addison and John Strawn, they rode like thousands of kilometers. They served huge swaths of land with no roads. They wrecked their health to serve as many people as possible. And so when the societal sort of trend shifted a little bit, it's not like the church sort of was like, oh, they were more like, okay, we're here, and now with the money, we will build the churches. And I was struck when I was in Ireland last summer too. We tend to forget because we have so many spaces in even rural, like I live out in the country and stuff like that, but there's numerous spaces that you can be, including my own home, which is remarkably comfortable because I have Wi-Fi and air conditioning and heating and everything I could ever possibly want. But as I was going through Ireland, looking at some of these like 1,000-year-old churches, you realize like through that medieval period, as you were talking about, they were about the only real space where you could be safe because of course there's government buildings. But what happens when the governor is your enemy? The only other space you've got to meet that is still considered sacred is that church space. And that would be the argument of Presbyterians and Church of England, because, of course, they've been through that. For the Methodists, and again, American, those issues were that sort of stability and structure was seen as counterthetical to what Jesus did with walking around. So I'm not here to weigh in on who was right and who was wrong. I think they're both in service. And that, for me, is a great lesson for people who are desiring to serve Canada today. Is to be in service, not expect people. And we've all been in churches where we're like, well, I don't know how they're going to go. And like this next generation, they're never going to, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, you don't actually want to serve. You want other people to change their minds and come here and do church the way you're used to doing church. And that's fine. Once you recognize it, like, okay, that is actually what I'm doing. I do love, especially for some of from our older congregants and stuff, it's like, you've been serving this community, some of them their whole lives. That could be 80 years. And I have no problem saying, like, I don't want to pull the rug out for you in the last few years you're here. Like, I love the fact that this place is family to you. And I should, as your minister, as much as I want to change things, that's sacred too. So these are not diametrically opposed ideas. This is just the ebb and flow of people trying to live out their faith daily.
Yeah, I love that, James. It's something I see a lot in the work that I do, and that's, I guess, a couple of different connections would be that notion of, and Stuart says this quite often, the reality that the church finds is.
Rub Stuart so much in my face. Like,
I'm just going to keep mentioning him just because,
now I'm getting jealous.
This is from the Center of Lifelong Learning at Knox College, and I just have to make sure that our retired professor, the Reverend Dr. Stuart McDonald, gets mentioned many times. But sorry, I'm here with Dr. James Tyler Robertson. But just that this sense of like the reality we find ourselves in today is not our fault. It's societal and stuff like that. And then the other piece, what I love where you're coming from there, is this notion of just being faithful with what you've got or what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's, if we could just do that and stop worrying about, hey, that church down the street's doing better than us. Why are they doing this or that? Or how even we judge that. Just do what you got. Be in service to people. I think that's a beautiful way of seeing it.
And that's how many sermons do we have? Or like, stop comparing yourself to your neighbor. And I mean, if you want to go broad strokes Canadian, our neighbor is America. There's 10 times the amount of people there. They have this thing called the Bible Belt that Canada does not possess. Catholicism did not thrive in America in any way, shape, or form near what it was here. And one of the things I do like to say to my students, and I don't even know if I put this in the book, probably should have, but Canada is a Catholic nation with Protestant governance. And that's one of the things, that's a huge distance from our closest neighbor. And then again, if we get to this place of where we're comparing ourselves to what the American church is doing, and again, I think a lot of that boils down to bigger is better, and we could have all sorts of conversations about the current climate and then how the climate's been building and Jesus and John Wayne and all these really insightful sort of understandings of the culture there. But that's not the Canadian story, and we're setting ourselves up for a very unique and Canadian sense of failure that is just something we made up. It's not actually part of our story. It's not part of our history. It's not part of who we are, other than the fact that we've always borrowed from American culture, and that's fine. But we've also borrowed from European culture. We've also borrowed from Australian culture. And again, we'll probably come back to this a little bit later on. One of my major arguments is like, and yet we still seem blind to the fact that indigenous cultures, multiple indigenous cultures, also built what became Canada in ways that I think can actually be celebrated and recaptured.
Mm-hmm. I promise not to mention Stuart McDonald Well, I hopefully I won't mention him again.
Now it's starting to hurt. Now it's feeling a
yeah,
little
exactly. Sorry, I said his name again. I apologize. I won't say it again. I mentioned
Stu's
it the
best.
one time.
I love Stu. Like, we could just talk about Stu the whole time. That could be this whole podcast.
I mentioned him the one time, and I think I got away with it, but I'm not sure. We'll see. Okay, let me dive in to another piece in your book. So you reference Douglas Wilson's comment in his book, The Church Grows in Canada, that a lag between seminary and pew existed. So as two people who earn our livings in seminaries, I'm interested how you've experienced that reality. I can acknowledge that I certainly found that a common reality in the parishes that I served. It assumes, I think, a little bit that the seminary is maybe further ahead theologically, but I'm aware that you also raise this comment in the book related to a pushback on what we might call some new types of thinking from our recent graduates. For example, you share a bit of the story of of D.J. MacDonnell and the last heresy trial in the Canadian Presbyterian Church. Interestingly enough, 1 year after the joining together of the various Presbyterian bodies, which you mentioned were quite desperate, to form what is known as the Presbyterian Church in Canada today. Historically, a good heresy trial seems appropriate after some kind of union takes place, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think we burned the fresh-faced Reverend MacDonnell on a stake, but I wonder if you can say a little more about this connection you're trying to make during a time in history that certainly as Presbyterians celebrating our 175th anniversary as a denomination, we might think we've progressed beyond.
Right.
Especially when access to information is so readily available.
Yeah, I mean, right there is like that'd be the whole. We could talk about Stu for the first half of the podcast, and the second half just be like the access of information, what that has done to our understandings of the world. So I'll sort of push it past that. Like, I think you hit historically what's going on with the Presbyterian churches and stuff, and of course they're not far away from the other great cataclysm of Presbyterianism in Canada in 1925 with the formation of the United Church of Canada, or that other body. And it's funny because I, on my mother's side, there's MacDonnell's or McDonnell or all these different. So I'm like, this could be a distant relative of mine. So it really is an interesting story because it really was, there's a wrist slapping there. There's an almost a feeling like this is, and it is called the last heresy trial. I don't think that's what they called it at the time, but not too long afterwards. It's like, this is from a bygone age. We're kind of done with this because what he was called up on was he was serving inner city issues in Toronto, and in that he was wrestling theologically with some of the elements of the Westminster Confession, most notably about eternal torture and hell and stuff like that, an issue that remains alive to this day. Some Christians really like to double down on the idea of hell, others seeing all the different stuff. So this is sort of like the backdrop of what's going on. And we do find that people that work with people, genuinely working with people, have these kinds of theological struggles. And I think that is actually one of those very good things, as opposed to just kind of sticking to the letter of the law of the denomination. Is like, okay, well, how do we push around in this? So everything that you're bringing up, big strokes, people who've done well in institutions, have succeeded, have risen through the ranks. That's fine. But they can also become blind in the ways in which those institutions need to change because they didn't have to change them in order to have personal success. This doesn't make them bad people, doesn't make them oppressors necessarily. Sure, some can be, but it can also just make them somewhat blind. And I think for all of us, we're Gen X, we have rebel DNA within us, and we can come back to that. But we're looking a little. No one's looking to us as like, oh, this person's going to be great on TikTok or anything. We're getting to the point now of where we're going to have to start talking to young people. Is like, how do I post this? Everything we sort of joke about with our parents currently. And I think what we can tend to forget too in this blindness is also it's the role of the young to push us, because a lot of our experiences are behind us. And we can look at them with rose-colored glasses or not, whatever. But we forget that the young people, most of their experiences are in front of them, which means they're completely unknown. And that's their motivation. They are trying to push and change things. And they're young, so they're going to make mistakes. But lo and behold, that doesn't mean it's like, oh, we're right, we figured it out. It's like, no, we just done more. and we've got a lot more language around things that we've done. But it's the job of the young to push, not because they're wrong. They're young, and in their wrongness, they may actually do something really, really important. I mean, and I don't apply this to people's acumen, but there's a great quote: "Dumb and brave are two sides of the same coin. You just flip it in the air and see which side it comes down on." And usually that's historical interpretation. Usually this was an incredibly dumb move, but if it quote unquote succeeded, it would be celebrated and heralded as being an incredibly brave move. And especially now when we talk about like young people coming out of seminaries, not that there's a ton in Canada, but what world are they walking into? What is this world going to look like? None of us know. This might be, and I as a historian, I'm loath to say this, but this is one of those moments I'm like, I don't know what to train my own young people, because I don't think the jobs they're going to end up doing exist right now. And so for a vast majority of human history, you had a basic sort of concept. And of course, as the modern world goes, more options happen. But for the most part, Jesus was a carpenter because that's what his dad was. And that is mostly human history. And then if you've got a daughter, it's like, okay, who in the neighborhood do we like that we can marry her into and form it? Like these are the options, quote unquote, you have. They are, you could count them on one hand. Obviously things are going to change and whatnot, but now we're at a place of like, I don't know what to teach you. And that's really important. So maybe if I want to put it into the Presbyterians, you might, and I'm no psychologist, and by you, I mean the collective you, might have an uncomfortable hangover due to the 1925 and so on. And that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. That was, from this perspective, cataclysmic. But like all things, change is inevitable. Thankfully, the Presbyterians, we'll say specifically, do have a storied, well-documented past history character of sober reflection on Scripture, like taking Scripture seriously, looking at it logically, philosophically. I never want to like sort of remove emotions from it, because that never happens. So that's kind of dumb. It just sort of makes us blind inevitably. But like looking at this being like, okay, there's an ability to sort of look at the self and be like, my logic failed there, or my logic wasn't tracking there, therefore I have to correct. And I've always really, really admired that about more, and I hate these sort of terms, but a little bit more logical expositions of the Scripture. I'm like, there does give space to not just be caught up in the emotion of the moment, beautiful and powerful and necessary as that is, but also be like, yeah, we didn't handle that well. And here are some lessons, because Jesus was absolutely, he gives us all the teachings we need. The New Testament writers gave all the sort of instructions, quote unquote, we need to embrace change throughout all generations. And for me, I'm really, I think it was Richard Twiss, and I'm so sorry if I'm getting this, but in Indigenous Theology in the Western Worldview, I'm pretty sure it's Richard Twiss. I might be wrong on this one, so for that I apologize. But anyway, sort of highlighting the Acts 15 church. I was sort of raised in like, we're Acts 29, right? Like we're the next chapter of the book of Acts and whatnot. I was like, yeah, great. But also being like, try being an Acts 15 church, because you have all these people who are new thinking, or from their context, ancient non-Jewish thinking. What do we do with them that they're accepting Jesus as a Jewish Messiah, but also as their Messiah? Well, they've got a whole litany of religious stories and myths that are completely different and from some perspectives counter to the Jewish myths, and Jesus was Jewish. So you again see how both sides have an argument. But where do they come at that council in Jerusalem? What do they beautifully come to is this place of trusting in the Spirit and allowing space for people to theologize for themselves. But the safeguards were not theological, ideological, even philosophical. Like if you read the letter, you're like, what are they talking about? It's like the things are like, I just try to avoid this. And it was like strangled and blood and, loosely tamed sexual immorality and all sorts of other things. You're like, okay, these are really not definitive rules. But what they're doing is they're in a community. And I think this is what's great for those of us who are Gen X, because we have a great place of honor in the boomers and the millennials and the Gen Z, is that we get both sides. We were raised by boomers, but we rebelled against boomers. And we're raising millennials and Gen Z and get what they're doing, but also don't get what they're doing. They've gone too far from us. So we've got this wonderful sort of bridge position that I think if we sort of look at Acts 15 as a bit of an inspiration, it's this community that's how they sort of put the safeguards in, not philosophically, but literally in relation with each other. We can see, like, in a humility for both sides, we can create these worshiping communities that see the benefit in both the novel approaches of the young and the wisdom of the elders. But that only happens if both sort of appreciate each other. And I mean, my dad is famous for saying, he's like, only fools make all their own mistakes. So learn from each other. Like, really, there's no sense you have to do this. So basically, in short, just kind of keep heresy trials in the past. Let's let that heresy trial stay as the last heresy trial, and be in relationship with each other. And I think you and I could probably offer some wisdom from experience to some of the younger people coming out here. I was like, yeah, okay, but only if we're willing to listen. And I don't mean like letting them finish and then get them to what we believe is to be the preconceived thing. Really listening to the concerns, and then it's just sort of incumbent upon the young to be like, okay, you and I have lived however many decades. At the bare minimum, we haven't made any fatal decisions yet. So there might be these two chuckleheads may have figured out a couple things, and even if the context is a little bit different, maybe I can avoid a couple mistakes, and then be like, oh yeah, I tried that then, and here's how it blew up in my face. Like, oh, didn't sort of think about that. Okay, then I think you and I get sort of enlivened by the exhilaration of youth and carving out a world, because you and I did that, and then we can sort of like see new ways in which we can take maybe something that we've sort of struggled with ourselves and be like, you know what, that is a good question. So I'm not gonna put it on the young what it is that they've got to do, but I'll say for us, some of these new thinking, I was like, let's just operate less from this sort of fear base and be like, that is their job. They're doing what young people do. They push. And of all people who should know that, it should be the boomers. We're all living in the wake of what they did. So thanks, boomers. Okay, boomers. I'll change it up. There you
go. Okay, boomer. Yes. When I think about an expression I used a lot in ministry was I always felt like I was standing in two worlds. And you've really described that. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about being a Gen Xer, but even in the church world, that two worlds where you can see, it's a bit annoying at times because you can sort of see two sides and you're holding two things to be true at the same time. It's a difficult way of living. But let me get into another piece of this wonderful book.
Just for you.
Oh, go for it. You go for it. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Just for you. That's what I think this is like. I believe it's G.K. Chesterton. No, F. Scott Fitzgerald. His definition of intelligence was to be able to take two seemingly contradictory ideas and hold them as true at the same time. I actually think that's a really beautiful way of describing what Jesus has called us to, like what genuine Christian faith is sort of doing that thing. And I really do think if we want to just, put a pin in the heresy thing, I think it's when we put one down and focus too much on the other. So, I mean, the classic one is like Jesus is both human and divine. And so everybody's really comfortable with the divine. No, everybody. Christians are very comfortable with the divine. But, there's a beautiful, beautiful painting. Oh, and I forget the artist. And it was Mary giving birth and looking like a woman giving birth. Like in any other context, totally fine. And there was an uproar because it was like, you're showing the human, like the humanity of Jesus, the idea that he changed his mind, that his interactions with the Syrophoenician woman, he changes and stuff like it. People do not like that. I was like, that's a problem because you're sort of holding one orb as more important than the other, and the trick. And I think you're absolutely right. So that's why I think there's a beautiful gift in it. You're right. It's not easy, but I feel like that's actually what gets us to a closer. I think it just kind of self-humbles us. And again, we can never do that on our own, but in community, that sort of humility of holding these two things together, I think actually helps us walk a better way in the world.
I'd like to think that too, James. I think it's a good way to live. So I'm glad that I'm in line with Jesus. That's always a good thing. And I promised you, Ministry Forum community, there could be some tangents. So I'm going to just keep going on this tangent for a second. But the interesting thing that I've seen in our history is things like where we get into trouble is when we try to when we say that there is only one way. And so you think about these Jesus communities that happened for hundreds of years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And then the Roman Empire says, hey, this is our thing now. We're going to make it a state religion. And oh, by the way, could a group of you get together and then tell us who the right people are and who the wrong people are? Who do we have to go kill? Yeah. If you don't affirm this, like the whole formation of a creed and saying this is the only way. And it's like, but there was a time when, we don't think about this often, but there was a time when Christian communities were just Christian communities and they believed in a diverse kind of way. And that seemed to be an okay way to live.
It's beautiful. Origin. That's why Origin's still my favorite.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. All right. let's get back into this book of yours, and I'm going to touch on the Roman Empire as well. Let me mention Pierre. I was going to say Richard Burton, Pierre Berton. His book in 1965, The Comfortable Pew. People quote it all the time in the church about comfortable pews, and they think it's about pews that they sit on. It sort of is, but really the book wasn't. I've been driving my colleagues absolutely batty as I've shared the connections it has made for me and the reality that we find ourselves in the church today, at least the way in which you extrapolated in your book. Perhaps it is connected to the disconnect between clergy and laity, or seminary and pew. But I wonder if you could share for our audience just a few of the basics of Burton's argument and comment on your extrapolation of Burton's condemnation of the church, where you write these words: through repetition and religiosity, clergy had done more to weaken Jesus than anything the early Roman Empire accomplished. Go.
Yeah, it's yeah. Actually, I'm kind of proud of that line. That's good.
It's a good line.
Thanks. Yeah, I think so. So Burton's thesis was he was a Church of England, born and raised, and walked away. So to their eternal credit, the Anglican Church. I'll just switch to calling it the Anglican Church. I hope that's okay for the audience. Wanted to reach out to their former son, who was well known, highly regarded, and considered a very good writer, commentary on Canada specifically, and basically asked him the questions like, "Why'd you leave?" And the comfortable pew was the answer. And I think it'd be remiss to say that. I think if all of a sudden the comfortable pew became the way Christians did church afterwards, I don't think that would have been a good thing. A lot of Pierre Berton's, comments and whatnot were kind of already happening in churches and whatnot. So he made some good points. But I think if the church were to go the way Pierre Berton wanted to go, the church would have ended up looking more like it'd almost be kind of like a CBC or like a more moderate or left-wing newspaper. That's kind of how it would have been framed. There wouldn't have been a lot of attention paid to ancient truths of the Christian faith, which we are just called to wrestle with. Like the people who get to tell us what Christians are their closest followers to Jesus. This is why the early churches kind of always have to be in the discussion, even if people sort of misinterpret what it is that they're doing from our present, political, social climate or whatever. But Burton's idea was, or Burton's major critique, which I think holds to this day, was that clergy in Canada have sort of they're a little bit asleep at the wheel. They're just trotting out old adages. They're just telling the same old stories. There's nothing really of Christ in them, and by that he really means like the social radical. Which again, we have to look at the date when this was written. This is the 1960s. I mean, we are just on the heels of Vatican II. So even the Catholic Church is doing these profound reforms. We have communism. These are. I'm not exactly sure which month, but at the end of that year, like November, I believe, like the Vietnam War starts. So we have all this rhetoric around communism. We're 20 years out from the Second World War and the way the world absolutely has been rechanged. And America is like the new superpower on earth. But we got the Cold War. We're through the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're in the early days of the sexual revolution, which is everything from women's rights to new queer identities coming out into the foreground. And so Burton brings up some really good points. Like, when we look at the tale that everybody knows, the Good Samaritan. Well, the word Samaritan doesn't do anything to Canadians. Canadians actually assume a Samaritan is a good person. And his argument was that in Jesus' time, the Samaritans were theological, religious, and national enemies. They were hated by the Jewish people. And so his point was like, you should have a tale called The Good Communist or The Good Homosexual, were a couple of the examples. He talked about, people wear crosses around their neck, and there's nothing scandalous about that. He's like, but you wear an electric chair around your neck. Now you're getting closer to what the original authorial and original contexts were. And on those points, I think he's absolutely right. So it kind of goes back to that old adage of like, the church is there to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Have a more eternal mindset in mind, is like the current comfort you're enjoying comes at an expense, theologically, socially, economically. These are big things. And I think for any of us who've been like clergy at Christmas, like Burton's arguments are still kind of alive, because his thing was like, you need to sort of really dig into the newspapers, the issues of the day. You need to, from your pulpit, really weigh in on that. And I think we could sort of look at it as like, that is very much a double-edged sword, because we do see that happening, and not always in ways that are gospel honoring or Christ honoring in any capacity whatsoever. But for any of us who've sort of preached the year at year 12 at your church, and it's Christmas, and you're seeing the Santa bunnies, the people that only show up on December 24th or whatever, and you're like, what new angle to these 2 chapters of the 4 Gospels can I possibly take, when all anybody wants is for you just to get through it, especially if I'm not talking about our Catholic or our Orthodox or maybe our higher Anglican brothers and sisters, but if you're more of like a Protestant or specifically like an evangelical or non-denominational church, what new message can you give to this unbelievably well-known story? What new angle? And especially since nobody really wants to hear a warm angle, they just want the warm and fuzzies. Warm angle, new angle. They just want the warm and fuzzies. They just want that whole stuff. So in that, I'm like, that's kind of Pierre Berton's argument, is like we're just trotting out these old adages, and what do you expect is going to happen? Everybody's asleep. The pew, which structurally is kind of designed for discomfort. It's hardwood, it's a stiff back, and it's to gear you towards like listening and whatnot. He's like, now you got it all in padding, and you're basically turning it into a lazy boy. Theologically, what does that do? What is the point? If you're looking for comfy chairs, the comfiest chair I have is the one at home. And the fact that I have a comfy chair means I have multiple chairs. So many chairs that I have a favorite. I can rank the furniture in my house. I can rank the clothing in my closet. So that shows that we are economically blessed. Therefore, for the church to actually do what it claims to be doing, it has to push people in an opposite direction. And I think his line is like, they prize comfort over conflict. And that's why the Canadian church, kind of from his perspective, again, and it's not a perspective I agree with completely, from his perspective, the Canadian church is just kind of a social community that's fine, but isn't doing what it's claiming to be doing. And in that, I think there's some valid points. However, there were some really interesting Christian expressions taking place right at that time, which is why I think the book was as popular as it was, is he wasn't really saying anything new. He's just kind of like, it was like the big moment of like saying these sorts of things, but lots of churches were doing really engaging social work, really engaging advocacy for it wouldn't quite hit there, but like advocacy for Vietnam draft dodgers, having a lot of conversations about that. The United Church have been doing really interesting things about marriage and divorce, being very engaged in, again, service to larger community and sort of like the theological ramifications that they held.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes when we have these sweeping sort of generalizations of the way the church is, it does hit the mark and convicts us for sure, but there's always outliers. There's always other examples of people doing it differently and everything else.
Yeah. Keep in mind too, like Pierre Berton had left the church.
Yeah.
It is asking a very articulate deconstructionist. No, I don't even like that term. Like somebody who's left the church, they're going to sort of point out, is like, this is why I left the church. Like, these are the critiques I have, and they're valid. And that's a perspective. You could also find somebody similar who is within the church, and they can offer, okay, well, here's why I stayed. And I mean, one of the great arguments is like, I stayed because you're absolutely right, and I wanted to change. Leaving it changes nothing. It just makes the church weaker, and maybe that's it. Maybe it has to die. Fine, whatever. I'm a historian, and that's not really the thing. But I do think for those of us in the academic, and I think you pointed this on too with Wilson's point about the pew, is in any capacity, there's that ivory tower of the academy where we sit around and we talk about things that, I mean, we make the joke. It's like, if a bomb hit this room right now, everybody on Earth that cares about this topic would be dead. And it's like, it's so, I'll quote the Tragically Hip, it's so deep, it's meaningless. Like, we're in such minutia right now. And I think that is one of the reasons why I'm still a minister. It keeps me real. It keeps me grounded, because like, what does this actually mean to my people who I know and all the stuff they're going through? What is this going to mean to them when I talk and we're together on Sunday? And those are the moments when I started laughing, like, this doesn't matter what we're talking about. These are just words, and cool, and I'm having fun. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to bring this into the pulpit, into the pew, into my church community, because it'll benefit absolutely nobody other than as a funny anecdote.
I love that about you, James. I love that. My favorite part of the book, and if the Ministry Forum audience hasn't figured it out yet, this whole conversation around Gen X is my favorite part of your book.
Same generation ever.
The best. As a typical Gen Xer, just to see us referenced in print, you know, that just endears us to your hearts. We just love you for that. But I can honestly say that I didn't expect a reference to Teen Spirit, and a whole rabbit hole about killing Superman. I had no sense that that was going to turn up in a history book. So again, you have to read the book to figure it out. I mean, why would we do that after Soup saved the world from Solomon Grundy? But I don't know. If only I had a deeper voice, I could really get that line. Not to mention, and you referenced them already, not to mention the Tragically Hip appear like all through the book. I love that. You'll have to read the book to see what I mean. But as I read about my generation, I came to realize this really interesting truth, and it just hit me as I was reading it. In my own 26 years of congregational ministry, I, a loud and proud Gen Xer, served predominantly boomer congregations. And those poor boomers to have to put up with me in a pulpit. Can you tell us a little bit more about what we may have been overlooking as the 1990s came and went, a bit like the Backstreet Boys?
For the attentive audience listening right now, Overlooked is the name of the book. So, I mean, I really appreciate how you worked that in there. You didn't overlook the title, so we'll just do subliminal advertising. That's very good.
You are welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's funny because I was asked once, like, the book's been out for a couple of years, like, what would you change? And I'll just say arrogantly, I was like, no, I'm fine with it. That wasn't the case, but the glaring oversight to a chapter largely built around music and Superman was the fact that I did not include the Crash Test Dummies Superman song, which addresses everything I was sort of talking about. The fact that I didn't include that is absolutely scandalous. Like, my overlooking of that is just a blight on that. So it's not great salesmanship for the book, but just when you're reading it, like, hang on, wasn't there a Canadian band at that time that sang a song about this very topic that you didn't reference in a chapter where you reference a lot of Canadian bands and their impact? I was like, yep, that is a glaring oversight. So
there's always time for a second edition.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole thing will just be an apology to the Crash Test Dummies. But I'll be very Canadian. I'll start by saying I'm sorry. I didn't. I totally blew that one, bud. I totally blew that one. There's so many fun things about Gen X. The 90s. Thank goodness the Backstreet Boys went, and there'll be one friend of mine who will be very upset that I said that, because she and I argue all the time about the ongoing return of the Backstreet Boys. And one thing we don't have to get into it now, but one thing we should address is the return of Superman. And that's very interesting. It is a very interesting sort of, like, this is a Gen Z Superman who is an illegal alien. And so, there's some on the nose sort of political stuff that's trying to be addressed here. But I was like, isn't that fascinating that Gen X, just the long and short is like, Superman didn't have any place in Gen X psychology. We're the children of Nietzsche. And so there's a darkness there that I think, and again, I don't like darkness being equated with bad. I think darkness is like, oh, no, we want to actually look at life the way it really is. And there's a whole big idea, like, there's a whole big machine here that's very polished, that's selling independence and rebellion, but actually is just another tool for becoming. And I think that was the big Gen X. That is Smells Like Teen Spirit. That is the Gen X sort of movement, and that is the 90s. And that was kind of the last decade that you could do that, because even the church in the 90s wasn't that big. It wasn't big enough to critique, really. There's very few Gen Xers that stayed, and those that did were sort of raised in the youth group of the seeker-sensitive attractional churches of the 70s and the 80s, and they were trying to do that. But again, it was kind of coming off as like polished and fake and, like glam rock. So there's a lot of struggles there. So most people just kind of left, because again, the messages weren't overly compelling. And even if we'd all stayed, I don't think much would have changed, because the other thing that's got to be recognized is that the boomer is the largest generation in human history, and Gen X is really small. And we're like there's more millennials than there are Gen X. So we're not really able to facilitate change. Even if all of us agreed on one thing, it numerically, just like a mathematical problem, it would not necessarily change. But also the 90s, Gen X created the internet. And again, we're kind of back to that. That's just, the 21st century has been just very, I used to say like the industrial is because of a sense about the Industrial Revolution. I think it superseded it, because it the Industrial Revolution built the cities, changed the economy. We had like it flattened the earth. I don't mean that literally, but now we could travel from places. So you didn't have like necessarily, and Canada's a perfect example. You didn't necessarily have like you have a Muslim country and a Buddhist Sikh country. It's like, or these ideas you may never even encounter because you grew up in a Christian country. That becomes less and less. So in that ways, it's pretty revolutionary. But the technology, the immediacy of it, we're still grappling with that, right? And I think we will be for generations to come. So the church is an interesting one because that's sort of like the last decade where religion in the West, and especially, I would say, especially in Canada, wasn't seen as a real dominant cultural influence. I think you could make the argument it was, and if nothing else, the echo of it still held sway. But that would change in the 21st century, and I reference that very dramatically in the 21st century. Like that is, and we've all been talking about religion in the 21st century, which is really interesting. But the 90s were the renaissance of the Dark Knight, Batman, if we want to do that. So there was a sort of sort of grim. It is really interesting to sort of, I've been really tracking how Batman and Superman and the DC world, especially in this age of superhero films everywhere. I'm like, this is really interesting because these are. I don't want to oversimplify this, but just keep in mind with the role of media and the cultural moments that are less and less. Like TV shows used to have cultural moments. Like people got together in the 90s and watched the end of Seinfeld, watched the end of Friends into the 21st century. Anyway, yeah. So there's these big moments, and really all you kind of got now is sports and then movies. So like when big movies came out, but of course now all that stuff is sort of being weighed down. But in the age of the superheroes, like these are gods. I'm like, okay, this gives us a better understanding of the Greeks and all these different, like the gods. They are the pantheon. So it is interesting to sort of, it may seem odd, but I'm like, these are important things to talk about because in a world of very divisive politics, very divisive religious stuff, a lot of divisions and whatnot, if we still all kind of like Iron Man, we can talk about that. So these sort of form these cultural desires for attachment. We can kind of have these fake issues to talk about because the real issues are proving pretty problematic.
Well, and even sorry to interrupt, James, but around the superhero thing, even the advent of Wonder Woman, it actually includes Greek gods.
Oh yeah,
the god of war, like as an actual figure that needs to be battled and defeated by Wonder Woman, and it's like fascinating.
Yeah, okay. Really, really interesting. So, I mean, I don't know. It's how do I frame this? I don't want to I don't want to, in the words of the vernacular today, I don't want to throw shade. Ugh. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So there's an interesting thing, and again, I'll bring Stu McDonald into this too, but some of my other, like Sarah Wilkins-Laflamme, Joel Thiessen, some of my friends, Mark Chapton, James Watson, that are doing more like sociology of religion in Canada. Really fascinating stuff. And sort of looking at some interesting trends that are taking place with Gen Z. The second coolest name. I still think Gen X is just, and Douglas Copeland, Canadian author, came up with it. Coined it. We were known, for those who don't know, we were originally known as the slacker generation, which was a very inaccurate moniker, but Gen X really kind of, that's cool. So there's some interesting stuff where people are, and again, we're back to the numbers thing. So they're sort of, I do see some, I'll say older millennial Christians who are very prevalent on social media and doing some things, really sort of touting like this victory of the gospel. And I can't stress this enough. I'm like, it's a version of the gospel. It's a version of the gospel that has had a lot of saying and a lot of radio time in the Western world. It's not the version of the gospel, and it's problematic, but there's an idea that, the Bible is becoming interesting to young people again. Church is becoming interesting to young people again. Evangelicals are going to places like the Orthodox churches or Catholic churches. So there's like this sort of resurgence. And I think that's really fascinating, interesting to watch. But then I want to return us back to that 19th century as a cautionary. I get a little concerned when people get a little haughty and be like, see, this is the gospel at work. I'm like, hang on. You can also make the arguments that this could be in responses to a lot of the social issues. Like, this is a very scary time for young people coming up. I mean, the idea of renting an apartment is basically gone. And so like there's a lot of markers that are just impossible, are just well beyond people's grasp. There's a lot of division, there's a lot of isolation, there's a lot of different things. So a return to something that kind of gives a sense of clarity of who's right, who's wrong, and it even has like this tack back to the ancient. Again, I don't want to say that it's wrong, but I think the haughtiness or the this is the God, this is the spirit at work. I'm like, yes, but I want to put an asterisk all over this. I want us to be very cautious about this. I always go back to Martin Luther when he talks about history. He's like, God may well work in history, but when he does, he wears a mask. And so I'm very wary of people ascribing to providence all sorts of things. I'm like, hang on, there's some other points to put in here. And
definitely not to double down on any shade, but there's a
yeah.
sense of in that most generous way of seeing, because I've been reading a lot of this stuff too about there's resurgence of this younger generation. They're all coming back to church. They're reading the Bible. Isn't this amazing? It's good stuff. And I'm like, do we really think this is true, or what's the evidence say?
Yeah.
But in the generous way, and you've mentioned a couple of these tidbits throughout the conversation we've had. You know, maybe the reason, and again, it's how you play with the data from how I look at it. It's like, it could be that a Gen Z is returning to the church for that, like you said, the tangible needs, maybe just the needs of some kind of support or some kind of community in a time like this. Could be for that just sense of sanctuary, safety, a sense of stepping away from the kookiness. So I'm not really talking necessarily about content here. I'm talking about just the nature of a church space where you can come and get some of your basic needs addressed, or find some people to hang out with. You can find a space of sanctuary, maybe searching. Like I always used to say to the folks that I was in ministry with, you know, it takes incredible courage to walk across the threshold of our ancient building. We're 180 years old. And if somebody turned up today, there's probably something going on in their lives that they thought today of all days was the reason to turn up. And almost always, if you have a conversation with them, something's going on.
Something's going on. Yeah.
And then the last piece, just that wide spectrum of what the Christian stream or river offers. I think in some contexts, in some churches, the actual content is what they're looking for. They're looking for perhaps a place that gives them, in the midst of all this chaos, here's some basic answers for living. Here's some basic ways of seeing the world. And for some people, that's what they need in a time such as this. So I think it's really interesting, this whole conversation around the younger generation returning.
Well, and I mean, I don't want to step too far on my death. I do love the idea that you're like, to escape the kookiness, you go to church. I'm like, really? So I was like, I think that's a different kind of kookiness.
Are you a minister? You're a member of the clergy. You get it. Yes.
It gets kooky.
Amen. It's kooky everywhere.
And so, and I'm always wary, like, to me, history is a profoundly spiritual enterprise. But I don't want to do platitudes. I'm not a sociologist or religious, so I don't want to overstep things. But I mean, historically, when we start to look at, when we come at things from, again, things used to be and can be there again, that sort of nostalgia I'm like, as a historian, I'm always like, because the construction of what used to be is not going to very much, it's going to reflect very much the ethos and the agendas of today foisted upon the history. And this is a big issue in historical circles as well. We spend a lot of time talking about this, but the language around now winning people, this again, we're kind of back to, I think you and I were probably raised an idea that, like, our version of the faith, we are saved, and then other people are lost, and that is at a foundation of a lot of harmful ways of walking in the world, especially if you happen to be by the group that has a lot of power or some say over some policies and stuff like that. That is an almost undeniable temptation to walk in a very, very harmful way. And historically, we see that play out repeatedly in many, many different ways. And I would say one of the best ways I've actually heard it framed is my friend Matt LeBlanc, who is from iEmergence and Nate's, not the star of the TV show Friends. Really puts us away. It's like when we started coming at it with this, like a fear narrative of like, and sort of start to grasp, already you're kind of on your heels. So like, I used to box. So like the boxing thing is like, okay, you're already on the heels. So what you got to do is reset. So if you're operating from a place of being sort of on your back foot, you're in a survival defense mechanism. You're not necessarily being progressive or thoughtful or creative or innovative. But he's like, the other way is like, if we're sort of focused on what is the problem, he's like, it's only a matter of time in most cases till you end up with who is the problem. And if you mix that with that, like, we're saved, we've got the truth, we have all sorts of like testimonies, especially those of us who come from an evangelical Protestant background. We have all these crossing the switchblade kind of testimonies of like, I was lost, now I'm found. We have songs about that. But there is, and like, so we sort of had the stakes up there. And for me, it's a bit of exhibitionist morality. It's a little bit problematic because I'm like, the stakes are communicated as high, but they're not, because you're coming from a place of like, now I'm in this sort of superior worldview. And if you combine that with who is the problem, which tends to be those who refuse to see things the way you see things or to acknowledge your point of view as the superior point of view, then again, if we bring power dynamics into that, this is at the backdrop. This is the foundation. This is the impetus, the MO of all the stuff that Canadian Christians are struggling with and need to be facing currently, as opposed to sort of like these sort of nostalgic views of what things were like in the 50s or the 60s. And so I think that's a really important thing to sort of put into this, is like our quickness to use words like winning. Those usually put up like a few alarm bells for me, not as a person of faith, not even as a citizen in Canada or anything like that, but as a historian, I'm always like, the sides that are winning is like, just because of our training is like, okay, so let's talk about, the old adage, history is written by the winners. It's not. History is written by historians, and historians are losers. But that's where I as a historian, I grow a little bit concerned. I say this in my book. As a historian, I don't predict the future. We are loath to do that, but I do think there are really profound lessons we can learn from the past, and we can't just keep doing things the same way and claiming winning people over for going back to thought patterns that have been around for a while. That's fine, without also bringing in as like, we need to engage in this now, in the realities of the world we're in now. And that actually, I think, can give us some strong benefit, and actually probably some guidance.
That seems a perfect segue for my last-ish question as we wrap our conversation today, James. You devote a significant portion of your book to a chapter entitled Reconciliation. I appreciate your vulnerability in this chapter, and I know that Canada and the church's relationship with Indigenous peoples is certainly a passion of yours. You've referenced it a lot in our conversation. I want to express my appreciation to you for introducing me to the First Nations version, an Indigenous translation of the New Testament. When I attended your church, where you pastor, it's your translation of choice for reading scripture in worship. And so thank you for modeling that to your congregation. At the end of each chapter, you offer one idea as a takeaway. And for the chapter called Reconciliation, you ask this question: Indigenous Christianity is the oldest form of Christianity in this land. Why don't other Christians see it as a viable expression of the faith from which we can learn? I'd love to hear your take on this. And just before you begin that answer, you've used the expression nates a number of times. I know what that means, but maybe our audience don't necessarily know what that means. So maybe if you could just unpack nates for folks. And then, if you could share your thoughts on this question that you asked everybody else.
Yeah. So NATES is an Indigenous learning community. They're connected to, currently, as I'm talking to you now, Tyndale University, Acadia, Ambrose, and universities around the world. And what they're highlighting is, I'll say Dr. Terry LeBlanc. It's an acronym, but they don't go by the acronym anymore. So just understand it as an Indigenous learning community. And I mean, I don't want to speak into Dr. LeBlanc's stories. He's a venerated elder, but for the sake of the audience, I think there's enough of these sort of things around. So I'll say, first off, look him up on YouTube and find some of this stuff. But his own story talks about his becoming joining the Pentecostal church in the 90s, I believe. Oh, I'm maybe going to say that wrong. Anyway, the point being, he spent time working with youth, and all the amount of work he put into connecting Christ culture with youth culture. He's like, why am I not doing that with my own Indigenous culture? And that started him on a journey, they say. And then over time, he recognizes, like, this is not about changing Indigenous culture. It's about recognizing Christ already present in Indigenous culture. And in my personal experience, so it's anecdotal, and as a historian, you can always dismiss this, but I'm actually learning, thanks to the elders that are teaching me, I'm actually learning to embrace this. My own experience with this is a profound profound gospel spirit within many indigenous communities. And again, there's a whole variety of them. So we always really want to make sure that we're taking time to recognize that these are just all sorts of different nations, languages, cultures, worldviews. And I've been fortunate enough to travel around Canada and meet elders from a bunch of different nations. But I'll share a story because I think that's always the most important. I've been very honored and humbled to be part of 3 sweat lodges this past summer. I've attended 3 sweats. And in the second one, it was a man's sweat, and it was, brother, I don't have a great relationship to heat. I'm a bit of a sweaty dude. My ancestry is Scotland and Ireland. So I'm a bog person. I'm a bog person in my DNA. I like the rain. I like the mist. I like the cold. The heat really bothers me unless I can be in water. So a sweat was a genuine, I was genuinely, like I'm joking about it now, but I was genuinely had concern. And I went to some deep spiritual places. I prayed and I genuinely embraced the idea of like Jesus as a forerunner of my faith. And so I could find a way to spiritually embrace the suffering I was about to endure, which ended up being healing. So I don't want to, I'm not going to over dramatize this. And I want no one to be turned away from doing a sweat. If you are a believer and you get invited to a sweat, with every fiber of my being, go and be embraced by a community. Because what it did in just for me and in, all the journeys and the stories I carry with me in my life, at one moment when I was sitting in there, I recognized that in my entire spiritual walk, I make the joke is like, I've never experienced a theology of suffering. One, because I've had a very soft, good life. I've definitely suffered, but like a real experiential theology of suffering as part of our journey through humanity in a ceremony. My joke is like the closest I've ever come to this in church is just being really bored and after sitting out for another half an hour. But sitting in a place of where you're going to be there for a while and you can be uncomfortable. And then all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, in a ceremony space. So I think I didn't describe that very well at the beginning, but in a ceremony space being like, I'm going to, because I have to regulate my breathing because of the heat. I have to trust the elder is aware, and then I'm safe in this environment, even if so I can let go and see the healing in the suffering, not making it through the suffering and not getting, and anytime my mind would sort of cast myself to the future, I'd just breathe and bring myself back into that moment. And I experienced something profoundly spiritually healing, and it's something I'd never experienced. And I would cry about it later. And again, this is all stuff I'm working through my own sort of training as a historian. Is like, you got to take yourself out of this. And actually I'm seeing that more and more as a bit of a weakness. But what made me cry later is like, if only others could meld these two and see that these are one ceremony is not pagan, the other one's good. One ceremony is not God. Like, this has so much to show my Christian brothers and sisters. Not in ways I'm going to be able to preach. I'm fumbling through the story even but that experience, I hope and trust will be with me for the rest of the days that I have here. And the deep conversations and the simple reflections and how powerful they were behind that. It's like that. There's not a sense of like, we've got to convert the indigenous. We're right back to winning and lost. And we go all the way back to the Jesuits and up there, but there are deeply Christian indigenous people. And I'm going to, and this will maybe the scandal thing is like, and I'll make the argument, non-Christian indigenous people that absolutely live the spirit of Christ in ways I've never seen in any of my brothers and sisters. Now, the problem of that is, of course, I'm going to be hypercritical about my own culture and stuff like that and not see the beauty of it. And that's something I've been corrected by. And I think these are the conversations that get lost in all the vitriol around like decolonization and all the concerns people have. It's like, oh, so I just have to put a bunch of indigenous writers in there and get rid of all these other people. I'm like, no, that's never been my experience. And what I've actually been led to believe is like, learn where you come from. So all my jokes about being a bog person, learn where you come from and speak. And we want to keep building these tables where more and more people invited, because the more they speak, the more we learn. The more we learn, the more we can actually see God in these other places. And the generosity and the warmth and that spiritual way of walking in the world has really changed how I'm understanding. So if we're so willing to borrow from American churches, like I said, like UK churches, Australian churches, we have these beautiful spiritual nations here that understand this place, this land we're all walking on in ways that somebody from Northern Ireland, as beautiful as their Christianity could be, that's where my family comes from, is of that place. And I want to know from those who are, 16th generation Christian, but go back to prehistory as their families wandering these places, that have learned to live here and have seen Christ here. And as the Bible says, like, the land itself testifies to the glory of God. I want to hear those voices as well.
Wow, James. Yeah. I appreciate that. I appreciate the journey that you're on and the way in which you're sharing that with us and with all the places and spaces you occupy. Thank you. Well, finally, James, I'm wondering, I've never written a book. People always say that. I've never written a book, and I always assume that when you write a book, you have a hope for what people might get out of the book or take away from it. Now, with your book, I know it's important to you that we understand that Batman, especially the Dark Knight, is way better than Superman. Let's just be really clear. Yeah. But I'm going to say that I don't think that was your main purpose or hope in writing this book. What do you hope people will take away from it, James?
Well, I think the title that was given to me by Alicia Wilson, I'll always credit her for that. Overlooked is we just tend to overlook our own stories in Canada because we're inundated mostly with American. But I mean, from the American perspective, we're a little too European, and for the European perspective, we're too American. And both of those things are true. And so Canada's just done this weird thing of sort of blending things together. And to the previous point is like, and what gets overlooked is how much indigenous influences created the DNA of British North America. So the DNA of BNA is French, and it's English, and it's American, and it's Scottish, and eventually be Irish, and it's in indigenous structures, because that's who showed us how to survive, our ancestors, how to survive here. So that kind of makes Canada, and it's a mishmash. But I mean, like, history is just a collection of stories, and some people use that to sort of argue against historiography or history being a legitimate discipline, because again, we can go back to history written by the winners and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, there are very good arguments about sources, biases, prejudices, records being destroyed, the uses and abuses of history. I guess the only point I want to make too is, like, the present and the future are also just collections of stories. Stories, myths, again, that's one of those words on the other side of the Enlightenment we misunderstand. Like, a myth is the shape of the information you're choosing to function through your day. You're getting just a thousand. You're getting countless things thrown at you, and your brain, your eyes, your ears, everything is sort of organizing it into, like, what's a threat, what's important, what are you focusing on, da 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 da. These are stories. These are myths. That's the shape of the information that you are carrying with you as you function in the world. So I guess what I've always wanted to do, historians, we've all kind of given up on people other than other historians or historical lovers seeing our work as hope-filled, even though myself and most of it, like, including Stu probably, sees these things as hope-filled art. Like, these are ways to sort of wake up a little bit. And if you can just sort of sit with it for a second, you're like, actually, there is a path forward, and there's some real wisdom going in the back, looking backwards, figuring out where you've been will actually give you a good sense of where you are. So I'm kind of hoping that Overlook gives us the hope to learn our stories from yesterday, so we can tell better stories today, and maybe ask some better questions, and maybe even find some comfort in that. Although I like I said, people finding comfort in it is just not my circus, not my monkeys. I can't control that. So, like, the who's, the where's, the why's, the situations, of course, from the past are unique, and it's a mistake to sort of like one-to-one them, like, oh, this happened like 70 years ago, so that's happening again today. It was like, well, no, a lot has happened in between there. But as a species, humans have been in situations similar to this before. And to return to my father, only fools make all their own mistakes. So if we can really start to embrace some of these stories, sort of look at the stories we've been told, I hope we can glean a little bit of wisdom. There may be the ones we want to carry with us. There may be stuff that we've been holding on to that we're like, oh, this is what I love. I'll get a few students every semester, but like, oh, that's where that idea came from. Okay, I've never liked that idea, and I'm like, then drop it. It doesn't have to define you. If you're like, oh, because again, we're back to the two orbs being held. these ideas we have about God or faith ourselves were handed down to us and given to us by other fractured, broken, insecure human beings. And so there's everything gets to be up on the table. And so we can sort of look at these things. You're like, oh, okay, that's where that came from. Like, that's actually kind of beautiful. And I don't think there's a lot of brain that has to go into it, which sounds weird as an academic, because you know the things you're going to resonate with. I always want my students to meet one of their philosophical or ideological ancestors because they'll be drawn to the people they're going to meet in history, not necessarily because the words I say or the text I assign or the stories we tell, but there's be like, oh, there's something about her that I resonate with. I'm like, well, that's clearly your mother. I mean, this is, the cloud of witnesses. Christians hold to these sorts of things. I'm like, but really hold to them. Like, really look at them. Like, if there's somebody from 200 years ago that when they say something, you're like, oh, that's a neat way of saying it. That means that's answering a question you may not even know you've been asking. That's what I'm hoping. Like, that's a grandiose thing for my own book, but I'm like, that's what I hope all history can do. And I hope not overlooking our own stories is a gift, but again, in the economy and the mythology of God's kingdom, it's always the overlooked stuff that turns out to be the stuff. And I don't even think that's not unique to Christianity. That's good storytelling. It's like, oh, everybody loves a story. You're like, oh my gosh, that thing that happened in Act 1 was the thing. And I overlooked it. And now that I see it in this new perspective, it's the thing. We all pretend we knew that Bruce Willis was dead in Sixth Sense. None of us, spoiler. Sorry, it's been over too long. But then when you go back and watch it again, not only do you get the which is just a fun experience anyway, like having your world turned upside down. Then when you go back and you see the clues, you're like, oh my, then it's fun for that reason too. That's what I'm hoping history can do is a little bit Sixth Sense us, but also just sort of, I mean, good, bad, and otherwise. The great scholar and theologian, the vaudevillian performer Mae West, has a fantastic line because you can learn from everybody. She's like, if you can't be an inspiration, be a cautionary tale, because either way, you're helping people. So we can look to the people who inspire us, and we can look to some of our heroes and recognize, like, oh my goodness, they became a cautionary tale. All right. It doesn't mean you toss them all out. It's like, okay, that shows that you're sort of embracing this thing. It's like, okay, if this person's a cautionary tale, either way, you're learning something about yourself and how you want to walk in the world. That's what I'm hoping people can get from just understanding Canada a little bit more is don't overlook our own stuff. There's beautiful things to be found right here.
Yeah, because I think we get a bad rap, and I think as Canadians we immediately default to this. Like, we're not much to look at, like we're kind of vanilla. Don't pay attention to us. We're sorry for even being here.
We're sorry,
so sorry. And I love so much about how, as people of the book, or as people of stories itself, like our entire text is about stories that are told that give you an insight into the way the world works, the way human beings interact, all those things, but also the power of stories. I think in my own context, you talk about being a bog person. In my family system, the Borthwicks, we actually have a castle in the south of Edinburgh, and so in my family system, as I grew up, my dad would always tell me that we were a border clan, and we would work for, or we would fight for the one who paid us the most. We were mercenaries. We'd fight for the one who paid us the most.
Okay.
Well, way back at one point when I was taking an intermission, and again, for Ministry Forum audience, I'd encourage you to take sabbaticals or intermissions when you can in your ministries.
Nice.
I did a deep dive into my family history, or the family history of the Borthwicks. And as you know from history, you can either, you sometimes can't find your own stuff, but you can find what Laird Borthwick did, all the Lairds.
Yep.
And what I discovered was, oh, no. We weren't mercenaries. We didn't fight for who paid us the most. We backed all the wrong horses.
Oh, funny.
So during Cromwell, we were royalists. We were royalists. During the Scottish Reformation.
History's going to remember that. That's good. All right, yeah.
Yeah. During the Scottish Reformation, we were good Catholics.
Oh, no.
It's like, dude, you're backing all the wrong horses.
Yeah.
But I sort of thought, so if that defines you, if like as you dig into who you are and your story yourself, if you use these stories to define yourself. So I think to my father's way of understanding who we were, or who he was even, it was kind of like, I'll fight for whoever pays me the most. But if you actually hear the truth around the story of where your origin story, that's where we started with you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does that tell you? Oh, you're going to be someone who stands up for stuff. You're going to be loyal to something, even in the midst of this is the wrong horse to back right now. The army is coming, and that's why Borthwick Castle has a huge cannon shot in its wall, because Cromwell and his Roundheads put one there. When we were keeping one of the royals safe. Anyways, so yeah, I think this beautiful piece of how we. Because I think that's a piece of, as I understand, indigenous spirituality, sort of that really getting down to the source of who you are, who you've come from, where you've come from, what part of the land, all those kinds of things, and how that then will lead you forward in this world, how you present yourself in the world.
Well, and
go ahead.
No, and I think there's a beautiful thing in that, because 2 quick points, and yes, we'll wrap. Says the guest. I like that you found like a deeper sort of understanding of your family and your lineage, because this is who makes you who you are. And it's nice when you're like pleasantly surprised, but a lot of people encounter, and especially, and again, with Christianity too, if they walk into my class wanting to become well armed, they're going to be profoundly disappointed, because I think that is as a historian, I'm like, that's dangerous. I want to disabuse you of the myths as much as possible. And if you're studying history and you're really comfortable, I'm like, awesome, you're not studying history. You're regurgitating myth-making things and stuff like that. So that can be a profoundly uncomfortable place. And that's, again, we're back to like, live in those moments. Breathe through your nose and out through your mouth in the heat of being uncomfortable, and you will find healing. You will find healing. That's the only promise, is like, if you abort that, then the healing fails to come. And as a historian, I think maybe, or somebody who's very tapped into like these history back and from, what I really appreciate about the spirituality we're talking about, and I want to thank you for sort of giving the space and reiterating that too, is this sense of responsibility to you and I are only here because of the choices backing the so-called wrong horse, although in many of those cases I would make the argument history would actually be like, good for you, you'd be a hero, your family, your ancestors would be a hero, but you owe it to them that they made us, and we are only here, and then that shows like I owe all those ancestors that are alive. I mean, and I do want to correct my Max the 3,000-year-old mouse. Both my grandmothers, my maternal and paternal grandmothers, were family historians. So I grew up and I dedicated the book to them, because they imbued in me the absolute centrality of knowing your family stories. And you know, I'll get past all the thing, but at one point my father's mother showed me the family tree, and it goes all the way back to Ireland in about the 1400s, and it's huge. And it ended with myself and my sister. And there I was with age 11, and my sister is age 6. And that did something to me. And I was like, and I remember saying, she's like, she put her hand across the whole thing. She's like, all those people are alive in you. And she said, she worded it differently. But that does, I'm like, I owe it to those people to live a good way and to be thankful to them. And so again, Christians get really uncomfortable with this kind of language. It's like, but those ancestors, from the color of my eyes to how tall I am, to my preferences, to all these things, is because of them. And I owe that to my children and the ones who are going to come after me to do the same way. And as a historian, I love that too. It's like, no things are ever the work of one lifetime. You're just in this huge, beautiful story, and you have a very, very small, and in most perspectives, invisible role to play. And I think a lot of people in this age of social media and stuff like that need to remember that. It's like, as much as you're out on the interwebs and the face tubes right now, most of us are going to be completely invisible. And that is a beautiful spiritual posture to take. So thank you for sharing that, because sometimes that's hard for people to hear.
Is there anything that you'd hoped I would have asked you that I didn't, that you wish I had?
Just my feelings on Stu McDonald.
I thought you and him were buds.
Yeah. Stu's the best. And if anybody listening, I don't know, you've had him on before, and you'll probably do it again, but like when he gets on to like the witchcraft stuff is chef's kiss. Like I can listen to that. And it doesn't have to be, and this is the beauty of it, it doesn't have to be any more than just his encyclopedic knowledge of the weirdness of a very weird time in history and of weird times in history in different places and stuff like that. He's a great guy. So no, that's just a joking answer to no. There's nothing. I'm happy for the conversation.
I'll share your love with Stu when I see him next.
Yeah.
As we wrap, because we used the word rap earlier, raps are good. Whatever you like to put in them. That's
90s rap. 90s rap.
Oh yeah. Oh dear. Oh gosh. I didn't know you were going to go there. Any sort of celebratory promotion? I never say shameless promotion. Is there new projects that you're working on that our listeners might be interested in knowing about?
Yeah. Great.
Floor is yours.
An 1812 book will be out with McGill Queens.
Yes,
I'm supposed to be writing it right now, but I'm talking to you instead. So if there's any problems, that you're the reason not. So that's gonna
Isaac Brock. That's all I've got.
It's gonna be fun. It's a fun one. It's sort of looking at religion in the War of 1812, and
cool.
So similar stuff we didn't get into today, but that's totally fine. I'll come back 8 years from now when I finish this thing. Probably more immediate, and I think actually really helpful, is I'm doing a project with Tyndale's Intercultural Ministries. And we are going across Canada, have been. The project will have a soft launch in January of next year, and then should be ready to go by fall, so a year from now. And it's just it's very Canadian focused, but it's also intercultural sensitivities, intercultural conversations, challenging stuff. Sensitivity is not the right word. It's about real practical equipping around obviously intercultural competence, but also spiritual formation. We have Joseph Wong leading on spiritual formation. There's a Bible and theology of interculturalism. And myself and my colleague Paige are working on the specifically Canadian context, which will bring in a lot of the diaspora conversations, a lot of Indigenous conversations, a lot of settler white guys like us conversations, and not in that I'm hoping. I don't know why I'm saying hoping. It won't be in these sort of like these media tropes of like, oh, here are the people who has to feel bad, and here's all the white guilt. These are not stories that are actually germane to the topic. In fact, I'd say they all work against us. So that'll be coming out in a year, and there'll be a lot of video elements of that people, the Tim Center is graciously sort of allowing certain aspects of it to just be for peoples and churches to sort of engage in some really, really good stuff. The Flourishing Congregations from out west, they'll be doing a video probably end of October on in defense of white Jesus. So I'll just leave it at that. And so, yes, come back in October and you'll see what the heck it is that I'm talking about. And yeah, I know, so good. Sometimes it's like little things that'll be out there that'll be people are like, well, his career's over, and it might be. That's fine. And then honestly, and we sort of captured on this, but honestly, just the unpredictable and beautiful ways in which I got to travel a bit and meet with Indigenous elders around our nation and have just learn and really how beautiful a lot of those things are, because it's sort of hammered in what I would say maybe words, but definitely the absolute centrality to community. We need to be doing community together. We need to be in better relationship, and all it means is just showing up. It's just a matter of I got to get off the couch and I got to go do this thing. And that doesn't have to be an Indigenous, that could be a bowling league, a book club or something. Just get off the couch and be in a community where other people you can share your ideas with and listen to their stories. So those are sort of the things that are coming up in the next while, and then teaching some classes in January.
That's good. You got to do some teaching if you're an associate professor.
I do. I got a whole. What they say? The joke is in seminary. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for this joke, but I already announced it. I better say it. Is in the academic world, it's publish or perish, right? You have to do your research, and in the seminary world, it's publish or perish. PARISH. How do you like that?
Boom, boom again, and you do both.
All right, there it is. That's two. That's not bad. That's way less than my usual.
And you do both, Jamie. You've created an awesome book. I'm so delighted to have read it. You can see the audience can't see, but I have lots of little flags in the book where
a little ASMR there. A little. Oh, should we talk quietly about the book?
Yes.
And
It's turning so beautifully. It's a lovely book. Appreciate the people who were a part of publishing it as well. The New Leaf Press.
Yes.
Good little press that was able to publish that book for you. Love being in relationship to you. Oh, You've got something else? One more thing, people. We're very sorry. I know you probably want to go. You're listening to this and you're thinking, when are these two guys going to stop talking?
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
But one more thing, Jamie.
The audiobook of Overlooked will be out in October, November of 2025. So pay attention to New Leaf for that. I can't believe I didn't say that. Sorry.
With your velvet tones?
It's myself. I have some wonderful voice actors in there and a good friend from Saskatoon called Oscar's Hollow that did music for the audiobook. Oh, yes. We're trying to have some fun with this one. So
this is a fancy audiobook.
Our tagline is Overlooked. It's like reading with your ears.
I love reading with my ears, James.
There you go.
It's a good thing. All right. Thank you for being with me, James. All the best to you. I'll try to get to church at some point when I'm not in churches somewhere else. But thanks for joining me on the Ministry Forum podcast today. Thanks for joining us today on the Ministry Forum podcast. We hope today's episode resonated with you and sparked your curiosity. Remember, you're not alone in your ministry journey. We're at the other end of some form of technology, and our team is committed to working hard to support your ministry every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, tell your friends, your family, your colleagues. Tell someone. Please don't keep us a secret. And of course, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review in the places you listen to podcasts. Your feedback helps us reach more ministry leaders just like you. And honestly, it reminds us that we're not alone either. And don't forget to follow us on social media at Ministry Forum on all of our channels. You can visit our website at ministryforum.ca for more resources, keeping up with upcoming events, and ways to connect with our growing community. Until next time, may God's strength and courage be yours in all that you do. May you be fearless, not reckless, and may you be well in body, mind, and spirit, and may you be at